I go to a small community college, the kind where everyone knows everyone. So when something serious happens, word spreads fast. But last semester, when the lockdown happened, there was no time for rumors, no whispers of what might be going on, just a sudden, sharp announcement over the intercom. This is a lockdown. Secure your doors. Stay silent. No explanation. No context. I was in the library, sitting at one of the long wooden tables by the reference section, cramming for an exam. Around me, a few other students were scattered about, some studying, some napping, and a couple of guys whispering while pretending to work on their laptops. At first, no one moved. The words hadn't fully sunk in. Then the librarian, an older woman who had been working there for years, stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Now, move. Lights off. Get down. The urgency in her voice hit me like a punch to the stomach. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a drill. Someone killed the lights, and the entire library was swallowed in darkness. The big glass windows along the far wall, which normally gave a view of the quad, had security blinds covering them, so the only light came from the red exit sign above the door. The librarian whispered instructions, pointing toward the bookshelves. Everyone scattered, slipping between aisles, crouching behind tables, pressing themselves against the walls. I huddled between two tall shelves in the history section. My heart was hammering. In the dim light, I could see a girl across from me, hiding behind the poetry books. Her hands were clamped over her mouth. The urgency in her voice hit me like a punch to the stomach. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a drill. Someone killed the lights, and the entire library was swallowed in darkness. The big glass windows along the far wall, which normally gave a view of the quad, had security blinds covering them, so the only light came from the red exit sign above the door. The librarian whispered instructions, pointing toward the bookshelves. Everyone scattered, slipping between aisles, crouching behind tables, pressing themselves against the walls. I huddled between two tall shelves in the history section. My heart was hammering. In the dim light, I could see a girl across from me, hiding behind the poetry books. Her hands were clamped over her mouth. The room was dead silent. Then we heard footsteps. Not just regular walking. Someone was running down the hallway outside. The kind of fast, heavy footfalls that make your brain scream. Run. Hide. Don't breathe. The sound grew louder, pounding against the linoleum floor like something was coming straight toward us. Then, silence. The footsteps stopped, right outside the library doors. My stomach twisted. I could feel the energy in the room shift. No one dared move. I could hear the shallow, panicked breaths of the girl across from me. I stared at the double doors. They were locked. The glass had a thick security film over it, enough that we couldn't see who was out there. But we could see shadows, a pair of feet, just standing there, not moving, not pacing, just waiting. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. My pulse was hammering in my ears so loudly, I was afraid whoever was on the other side of that door could hear it. Then, slowly, the feet turned. They started walking away. I felt a breath of relief trickle through me. Then, just as they faded down the hall, another set of footsteps. The problem? The first set had never entered the building, and there was only supposed to be one suspect. I locked eyes with the girl across from me. She had heard it too. I could see the whites of her eyes, wide and unblinking. In the darkness, someone let out a tiny, almost imperceptible whisper. "Did you hear that?" Before anyone could react, the first set of footsteps came back, fast. This time, they weren't stopping. They slammed against the door so hard the glass rattled. Someone screamed. The librarian clapped a hand over their mouth, shushing them frantically. The doors held. The footsteps stopped again. I couldn't see who or what was outside, but the way they had moved, the speed, the impact, the silence afterward, it wasn't normal. Seconds passed, then minutes. The second pair of footsteps never came back. Eventually, the official "all clear" was announced. The police had swept the building and confirmed it was safe. They never found a suspect inside. But I know what I heard. 2 sets of footsteps, and only one person was supposed to be there. During my sophomore year, I had a late-night class, the kind that drags on until you start counting down the minutes until you can leave. It was winter, and the campus was practically deserted by the time I got out. I had chugged an iced coffee earlier, so before heading back to my dorm, I made a quick stop at the restroom in the old humanities building. The place was dead quiet. Just the sound of the overhead fluorescent light buzzing faintly. I picked a stall near the middle, locked the door, and sat down, scrolling mindlessly on my phone. That's when the announcement came over the intercom. "This is a lockdown. Secure your doors. Stay silent." I froze. At first, I thought it was just another drill. We had them all the time, and they usually ended within minutes. I figured I'd just wait it out in the stall instead of making a run for it. Then I heard someone come in. The heavy door creaked open, then swung shut with a dull thud. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I glanced under the stall, expecting to see a pair of shoes walking toward another stall or heading to the sinks, but the feet stopped. Right next to mine, black sneakers, worn down, just standing there, not shifting, not moving. I frowned, my fingers hovering over my phone. Who the hell just stands like that? I texted my roommate, "Hey, we in lockdown or what?" She replied almost immediately, "Yeah, dude. Get somewhere safe." My stomach tightened. I could still see the shoes under the stall, but the person wasn't moving, wasn't using the toilet, wasn't making a sound, just standing there. I held my breath, trying to listen for any rustling, breathing, anything, but the room was completely silent. And then something slid under my stall. A hand, pale fingers, creeping under the door, reaching toward me. My breath hitched. My entire body locked up as I yanked my feet up onto the toilet seat. The hand stayed there, motionless for a few seconds. Then it curled its fingers, like it was beckoning me. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I swore it would give me away. Then, slowly, the hand withdrew. I didn't move. I barely even blinked. I forced myself to look under the stall again. The shoes were gone, but I never heard them leave. The restroom door hadn't opened. There were no footsteps. Nothing. I waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Eventually, the lockdown ended with another muffled announcement over the speakers. I forced myself to push the stall door open and step out, my pulse still hammering in my ears. The restroom was empty. I checked behind me. All the other stall doors were open. No feet. No shadow. No one. I nearly ran out of there. But the worst part? Later that night, after I calmed down enough to think straight, I called campus security. I told them what happened, expecting them to brush it off, maybe say it was just another student messing around. Instead, there was a long pause. Then the officer on duty said, "We reviewed the security footage." No one entered that bathroom except you. Last year, we had a lockdown that lasted nearly 3 hours. Not a drill, not a mistake, a real threat. Someone had called in a warning, and the campus police weren't taking any chances. Every door was locked, every light was shut off, and every student was left sitting in silence, waiting. I was in my psychology class when it happened. 1 second, we were discussing behavioral conditioning, and the next, my professor was rushing to the door, locking it, turning off the lights, and motioning for all of us to get against the back wall. Most of us thought it was a drill, until we saw her face. She wasn't calm. She wasn't reassuring. She was terrified. So, we did exactly what she told us. For the first hour, it was just tense silence. A couple of people were texting under their desks, but no one spoke. No one dared to. And the whole time, my eyes kept drifting toward the classroom across the hall. Room 209. It had been empty for months. Some old excuse about water damage, but no one ever saw repairs happening. No custodians, no construction workers, just a locked door and dusty desks sitting inside, untouched. About an hour in, when my legs were starting to go numb from sitting against the cold tile floor, I heard it. A noise from across the hallway. A faint, scraping sound, like a chair being dragged across the floor. Slow, deliberate. The sound sent a chill straight through my spine. I wasn't the only one who heard it. My professor stiffened, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her phone. "No one's in that room," she whispered. And yet, the sound continued, a chair being slowly pulled back, as if someone was taking a seat in the empty classroom. Then, silence. I stared at the bottom of the door, waiting for shadows, movement, anything. Instead, we heard a new sound. 3 soft knocks on our classroom door. Someone, or something, was on the other side. No one moved. No one breathed. Then, footsteps, slow, pacing, back and forth in front of our door. My friend beside me pulled out his phone and started recording. I wanted to tell him to stop, but I couldn't even find my voice. We sat in silence, hearts pounding, listening as the footsteps moved back toward room 209. And then, nothing. No footsteps leaving, no doors opening. Just dead, suffocating silence. It was another 2 hours before the lockdown ended. When we were finally released, I expected to see someone, maybe a cop or security guard, walking the hallways. But there was no one, just a line of nervous students shuffling out of their classrooms. Before I left, I glanced at room 209. The door was locked. The lights were off. But through the narrow window, I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of the desks, the one closest to the window, was pulled out, slightly away from the others, like someone had been sitting there. Later that night, my friend played back the recording he took during the lockdown. At first, it was exactly what we expected. Silence, then the faint scraping sound of the chair moving. But when we got to the part where the footsteps started, there were none. Just the chair scraping, and a whisper. We couldn't make out the words, but we all heard one thing, clear as day: laughter.